If you're a Christian and you don't watch The Chosen, I really think you're missing out. And I feel like I can say that because I didn't watch it. I'm quite a recent convert to it, but I love it. Oh my days, it is so good. So let me just share with you some of the reasons why I think it's really, really good, and we've just got to watch it and support this thing. I think I didn't watch it initially because part of me was like, oh, it's not actually the Bible. I'd also heard like, oh, there's something to do with Mormonism maybe influencing it. There's not, by the way. And probably most of all, I kind of thought, I don't really need it. Do you know, I'm reading the Bible, I'm praying, I'm going to church, I'm reading books. I don't need that in my life. That was quite silly of me. So here's the first thing that I think is really, really great about it. You may or may not know some of the historical context about the Roman occupation and the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Zealots and who everybody was and what they did. And I kind of knew those things. I've got a theology degree. I'm a youth worker, youth pastor. I've got this YouTube channel. I do a lot of Bible stuff. But it's one thing knowing that, and a totally different thing seeing it acted out, where you see a Roman guard walking through the streets and the way that they're like looking around and the way that everybody's staring at them with hate but with fear and cowering, and you see Romans wiping graffiti off the wall saying the Messiah is coming down with Rome. That sort of thing really comes to life whenever you see it. So whenever you read the story of the Roman centurion who liked the Jews and Jesus healed his servant, you're like, oh, that's really weird. I can picture what Roman centurions would have been like and how they would have interacted with the people, and that totally goes against it. Or things like, oh, I love the whole storyline with Simon the Zealot and Matthew the tax collector, ex-tax collector, because the Zealots were like a violent revolutionary group who were like, the Messiah's not going to come until Rome are gone, so we gotta get rid of the Romans, and they did that violently. So the fact that, I mean, you skim over it whenever Jesus chooses his disciples and says, Matthew, who'd been the tax collector, Simon the Zealot, and you're like, whoa, hold up, a Roman tax collector and an anti-Roman violent revolutionary, and then you see that played out on screen and you're like, oh, this is just so dope. Really brings it to life. That brings us on to the second reason then. It can be really easy, I know, to read the Bible as like a theological textbook where you're looking at things and you're saying, okay, well, what is this saying about God? What's it saying about me? What's it saying about the world? And that's a good way to read the Bible. Okay, that is helpful. That is what the Bible's trying to communicate. But you very quickly forget, or certainly I forget sometimes, that the people in these stories were people, that they had their own personalities and characteristics and quirks and flaws, and the way that they interacted with each other, the way that Jesus interacted with them. It can be easy to forget that people are people, but people are people, if that made any sense. So for example, you see Jesus interacting with Judas and you're like, whoa. Or there's this like really cool moment in season 3 where Jesus and the disciples go down to the Sea of Galilee and they're all splashing about, having a really good time. And you see Judas doing that with him and you're like, Judas, my guy, like you were there. You were one of the guys. You were one of the disciples. How could you betray Jesus like that? And I'd never really thought as much about Judas being a disciple and how that would have looked as I have since I watched The Chosen. And you also see what it looked like for the religious leaders to be really mad and for people to be like pro-Jesus but kind of scared of it. It's very cool. The third reason. We know that the Gospels are trying to convey theological truths, but they do it through story. And the thing about story is that whenever you immerse yourself in it and kind of put yourself in the story, you realize things and you see things that you hadn't clocked before. And so then I think The Chosen is just that, but played out on screen. And they are very clear that, like, look, this is not scripture. The first thing you see whenever you start watching the show is this disclaimer from them where they said, The Chosen is based on the true stories of the Gospels of Jesus Christ. Some locations and timelines have been combined or condensed, backstories and some characters or dialogue have been added. However, all biblical and historical context and any artistic imagination are designed to support the truth and intention of the scriptures. Viewers are encouraged to read the Gospels. The original names, locations and phrases have been transliterated into English for anything spoken. That's really hard to say. Let me give you 2 examples of scriptures that have been like transformed in my mind by watching The Chosen and then like immersing myself in the story as I'm reading it. So first of all is in Mark chapter 5 where Jesus frees the man from demon possession who was possessed by a legion of demons, and they're like, can we go into the pigs? And Jesus is like, yeah, and they go into the pigs run into the water, and everyone's like, and they go and tell all the people around the place, and then they come back and they're like, oh Jesus, can you go away please? And the man says, Jesus, can I come with you? And Jesus is like, no, stay, go around the place and tell everyone what God has done for you. I was studying that and I don't know how else to describe it other than like immersed myself in the story. I like thought about what it would be like to observe that happening. And as I was reading it, I thought, okay, hold on. The people see this miracle happening. They see the pigs all run into the water, and then they go and tell all the people in the surrounding towns and villages what has happened. And then they come back and talk to Jesus, and Jesus is still sitting with that man. So in Mark, that all happens just like that, whereas that probably took like a good few hours. And so what were Jesus and the man doing in those few hours? They were probably talking, which makes a lot more sense of why the man was like, oh Jesus, can I follow you? And Jesus is like, no, go instead and tell everyone what God's done for you. It's not in the text that they sat and chatted for a long period of time, but reading between the lines and stepping into the story nearly, you see that and you're like, oh. And then I think The Chosen just takes things like that and plays them out and be like, here's what that could have looked like. The other one is Luke 7, where Jesus goes to the town of Nain and raises a widow's son. And whenever I was reading it, I was leading a Bible study on it, and then it struck me that Jesus saw this widow's son who was dead, and his heart, he felt compassion for her, and so he raised the son from the dead. But it struck me that not long later, Jesus was going to be the dead son of a widow. And I was like, oh, and I nearly cried. I do cry at like every episode of The Chosen because it just hits so hard. But I was like, whoa, it just it slaps. Okay, the last reason. There's a lot of garbage on TV. You don't need me to tell you that. There's so much bad stuff. And this is a show made by Christians so that people would meet with Jesus, so that it would push them towards reading the Bible and encountering Jesus. It brings the whole thing to life. It's also super, super high quality. Like, the production value is insane. The cinematography is class. The acting is brilliant. Why would I not support that? Why would I not watch it? Instead of binging whatever is on Netflix, as they say in The Chosen, binge on Jesus. So that's why I watch The Chosen. If you do watch it, if you don't watch it, I'd love to hear in the comments why. I'm thinking a little bit more about our media consumption and what we take in. If you want to know a little bit more about that, then you should